Hi everyone, welcome to Luke and Friends. I am so excited about today's show because finally I can talk unrestricted about Lord of the Rings. I managed to talk about it every podcast, but today I finally have the appropriate guest, the Tolkien Superfan and TikTok creator, co-host of the Voices of Arda podcast, and also YouTuber, KNEWBETTADOBETTA, Willie Jenkins. Thanks for coming on. How are you today?
Hey, what's going on, man? What's going on? Look, how's everything, man? I really appreciate you allowing me to come on and discuss my favorite topic, man, Lord of the Rings, man. I'm ready to get into it.
Me too. I've managed to discuss on every podcast prior to this Lord of the Rings in some sense. And no one else has ever been as into it as I am. You know, I've had a lot of wrestlers on, a lot of TikTokers, a lot of creators,
Nice.
but finally you're the perfect guy for me here. And I could not be more excited. So, and I've also got my little Aragorn sword ready to go as a
No,
nice
still.
prop here. I had to show this off to my audience because it's my proudest piece of my collection. But I used to shoot this show in my library downstairs, and I had all my books behind me and stuff like that. But yeah, so I don't get to show off my cool collection as much, but I had to bring this out just for today. So let's
Beautiful.
get right into
And the
it. So
real Flame of the West.
exactly. And you know what? So that's what today before the show, I was doing a lot of research on you, and I watched your episode about your favorite swords in Tolkien's lore. And you were talking about Glamdring the Foehammer. Why is that your favorite sword?
Oh man, for one, Gandalf wields a sword in the Third Age. But if anybody's watched my content, Gondolin is my favorite place in the Lord of the Rings. The sword was made in Gondolin, and then it's just its uses. Turgon is one of my favorite elves of all time. He wields it. It's a kingly sword. It was probably, but definitely not. Doesn't say, but it was probably made by Maeglin or one of Maeglin or either Rogg's. People, one of those people. And so the sword glows blue whenever orcs are close. It's just it can bludgeon people. You know what I'm saying? Gandalf wields it with great effect. The fact that he's able to stop the Balrog's magical sword that's made of fire, and the way that the orcs are just terrified of this sword, and that it appears in The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. And you know what I'm saying? Even though it doesn't technically say it's in the Silmarillion, he's fighting in the Arnoriad. He's also fighting in the Fall of Gondolin with this sword. So just the overall just lore of the entire sword and its history, it just wonderful. It's beautiful.
Absolutely.
I'm amazed by it.
So you got into Lord of the Rings at quite a young age. When you were 13, I believe it was, you discovered The Hobbit while you were in detention in your library, correct?
Absolutely, yep. That's exactly
So
right.
when you were a kid, did you have, because I found my experience being a Tolkien fan, and I actually have only read The Hobbit, Fellowship, and then the first bit of Two Towers, because I'm a big movie guy, right? Like cinema is basically my life. I work in the television industry, and I only got into reading in the last 2 years because
Nice.
I used to drive a ton, and I thought, well, how can I make driving more exciting than just going back and forth? So I got into audiobooks, and but Lord of the Rings was the first one I read, well, the Fellowship of the Ring at least. And I read The Hobbit, and I hadn't finished Return of the King yet. And I'm so excited to get into Silmarillion before the new show comes out. But when I was into the Lord of the Rings movies, I had no one else to talk with them about. What was your experience like as a child being a Tolkien fan? Did you have other people in your community who were into it, or was it just you?
Absolutely no one to talk to about it at all. Absolutely none. No person. Even the person that showed me the Hobbit book knew the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, but he was just like a casual fan. He was like, this is pretty cool. He didn't get super into it or anything like that. But yeah, absolutely not. Just the way I grew up in the environment I was around, it wasn't that type of book wasn't the one people were checking for. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I was absolutely alone. I found solace and I had one friend like a little later, maybe a few years later that I had whose parents and their whole family was into Lord of the Rings. So then, but they very much were a different culture than mine. So I would go there sparingly, and then I'd absolutely be like super into conversation with their family, and we just got along well because we knew about Lord of the Rings. But it was like a weird situation in the sense that it wasn't really people that I grew up around, or like, you know what I'm saying? It was a new friend that I had got, and, you know, it's just we culturally were different, but it was, you
Yeah.
know, all love and everything was great with our relationship. It was just different from my people, you know what I'm saying? Even regular life, they live different from how I grew up. So
Hmm.
everything was a bit of a shock, but it was very I was allowed to, you know, completely have an outlet there, and it was awesome. And you know, you learn to be like, wow, man, you know what I'm saying? Like this is a different way of living and stuff like that. But look what we have in common. We both like this, and it was awesome. And more of myself could be, you know, out there, you know, when I was around them. So I
Yeah.
appreciated that. But besides that, absolutely no. Nobody liked Lord of the Rings. Nobody even really knew Lord of the Rings like that.
And you were into Lord of the Rings prior to the films, which is always really interesting to talk to people
Yeah.
about, because you have kind of the rare experience of getting to see the adaptation before, or like getting to see the hype around it as it's coming out, being a fan. Now you've experienced, you know, with the new show coming out, Rings of Power. This is nothing new to you because you were there for the Jackson Films announcement and all that.
Yeah.
What was I guess before the internet was so like rampantly available for everyone, what was your experience like watching the Jackson films come to fruition, and how is it kind of separate to nowadays with the internet?
Well, everyone has access to information, and now everyone is not everyone, but people know a lot more, and you know, there's a lot more fans, and it's like a trendy thing. You know what I'm saying? I'd say I'd liken it to Star Wars, whereas you know what I'm saying in the late '70s and '80s, you know, Star Wars became a thing. So now even kids now when they grow, it's not like a surprise to them because Star Wars has been out, so people's parents and all of that. When Lord of the Rings first came out, you know, I was very much the person to ask about it, like, oh, what's it? I knew everything about it, and you know what I'm saying. And then those people that did know about it would pop out and then become, you know, I'd say like authorities on the subjects, and we'd be explaining stuff that nobody knew about, and we'd explain that actually this is different. This is different from what the actual book is, but this is still good and things like that. And then you'd start seeing a lot of forums. I think it actually helped the internet actually blossom a bit with forums and things like that because so many people were, you know, into the movies that they, you know, they used the computers for outlets, and then they started being like, wow, people are actually into this. When I started reading Lord of the Rings, I didn't know that the book was as widespread and loved as it was
Hmm.
until a little later. And then I found out, wow, this was at the time before Harry Potter and the internet and things like this. Lord of the Rings was the second most read book on earth, next to the Bible. So that's a huge thing. But
Yeah, not a bad
you know,
reputation to have for sure.
not a bad reputation. And it's just, you know, when you're just in a little pocket of your own reality where you're just in your zone, you don't realize something like that. And then you just got to connect with the right people. So the internet definitely helped the movies connect with a lot of people, slowly, but surely. And then now when the new show's coming out, everybody has a little more grasp on the entire, you know, legendarium for the most part. You know,
Hmm.
even the most mundane fan knows, you know, about the hobbits, and you know, for the most part, you know, there's very few people who don't know about the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, and you know, you were talking about how everyone has kind of a grasp on like the whole lore and all that. Um, I think what's interesting is you also were talking about you know, your one friend who did like Lord of the Rings, their family had a lot of like cultural differences to yours, and now there are people with the internet who can so adamantly kind of give their opinions and stuff like that. How has the experience been, you know, being like a black creator, seeing like kind of like the negative side of people saying like, oh, well, there can't be black elves, there can't be black hobbits and all that. Do you find that, because it to me that seems to be all I see is straight negativity towards that, but I guess if you're more actively involved in the community, what are your like, how do you kind of navigate that negativity and the fandomness, I guess?
Um, well, to be honest, it does suck. You know, it
Yeah.
sucks that people have that opinion. It feels like you're okay to. It's okay for you to like this as long as you're not a part of it. You know, as long as you don't believe. You know,
Yeah.
everybody was fine. Like when I tell you my TikTok, I was embraced, and there was no negative comments all the way for like a whole year, and maybe one or two like somebody, but that's just the world.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I was actually like, this fandom is the best thing I've ever been a part. Where has this been all my life? I really was able to express myself. Everybody from where I was, supported, and they always knew I liked it, and they were like, wow, I'm glad you get to do that, because they were always into always supported me liking whatever I liked. I always appreciated that. But then things took a little turn, which I'm familiar with, because being somebody of color, you're familiar with certain situations. But I was just hoping that this wasn't that case. I was
Yeah.
hoping that maybe everybody appreciated my knowledge so much that they didn't mind that I was black and this, that, and the third. But you started seeing that when I wasn't against black elves, when I wasn't against black dwarves, then I'm a traitor and you're not pure to the
Or
lore, and
like
this
paid
and
by
the third.
Amazon or something.
Yeah. That's a huge one. I'm a paid chill and all of that stuff. That's more funny than anything, because these people that are saying that have no clue. They haven't never talked to me. They haven't reached out. They haven't said, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's see if you really are like that. Let me decipher that. You tell somebody they're that if you never met, you've never talked to. So that's a whole nother thing. But as far as like the racism is concerned, it was disheartening at first. But then it's like, you know what? There are so many people who don't feel that way, and so many people fighting to, for inclusion. You just have to just be on the right side of the fence and just say, you know what? If that's how you're going to be, cool. That's all right. That's how you're going to be. I can't change you, or if I can, it's going to be very slow. So usually I just block them, and it's a shame for them, because they're going to let themselves miss out on something great, something that's going to be a part of history.
Yeah.
Inclusion is nothing wrong with that. Tolkien doesn't say there aren't black elves. He doesn't say a bunch of stuff. They are only looking at it from one perspective. They are digging. The funny thing is they're digging down deep, and they're saying, oh, he wrote it as a mythology for England. And meanwhile, they don't even know the history of England themselves. It's not like any of them are English, the people that are saying it. It's like, it's just random white people. There could be somebody that's Russian that is like, well, Tolkien wrote, it's like, what are you talking about? I can see if you were like to a certain extent, I can see you defending that to a certain extent. But
Yeah.
the ridiculousness of it is it's mind-boggling. And it's like, you're not even, first of all, it's mythical. It's not like real people. If it was real people,
it's not that deep, like literally.
Yeah, it's a fake story. So the mythology you're defending is not real. It's just not real. So the color doesn't drive the story forward, so it shouldn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't take away from anything.
I've always thought that unless the character's racial identity is like crucial to their character piece, it doesn't really make a difference. Like, MJ in the new Spider-Man and the Marvel movies is a good example, because there is no aspect of MJ that gets changed where her color swap happens, right? But people say, oh, well, could you make Black Panther white? Well, no, you couldn't, because his identity and the character arc is tied to his racial identity.
Absolutely, 100%. Now, Blade, you can make a Blade white, because it's not really central to the story that he happens to be black, but it's not like, oh, he needs to be black. Blade, if he was white, he'd just be a white Blade. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's different. But Black Panther, on the other hand, or somebody like, if you were doing an autobiography, you can't make Martin Luther King white, because it's central that he's black to his character and the art. There are no characters in Lord of the Rings that their color really is essential to certain things, except for a few where they specifically say, hey, this is that. And if you look at the Rings of Power, none of the main characters have been changed. These are all characters that have been actually invented for the story, because the Second Age is such an outline, and most of the meat and potatoes aren't there. They just give you a telling of the main events and the main players, but very loosely. You know what I'm saying? So you actually have a lot to play with. So it actually makes more sense to do the Second Age. At first, I was on the fence, like, why are they doing the Second Age? There's not enough story there. But then you actually have the ability to build a story around it and bring in characters. Because because it doesn't say, you don't ever hear about Thranduil's wife. You never hear about Legolas's mom. That doesn't mean he doesn't have a mom. So if they bring a character in, are you going to say, That's not in the story. Well, he wasn't sprouted from, he wasn't made asexually. You know what I'm saying? The elves
Exactly. Yeah.
reproduced with a female. So of course that person had to be there. You know what I'm saying? I'd love to talk to these people, people like Neurotics and other people that just use hate to just get views, and really they don't make any sense.
And it's really easy to get views that way. Like you can throw such flashy titles or like, you see it a lot with every news. Like, I didn't really like the new Obi-Wan show, but not for a lot of the reasons that a lot of kind of people on like more hateful side are saying, like, oh, it's going woke or whatever. It's like the existence of a black character isn't intrinsically woke or whatever.
Yeah, it's just like it's like they're trying to say, okay, so now any character that's in the show that's black you're saying is woke. That's what you're doing. You know what I'm saying? And even if some studios or some things are pushing that agenda, look at the history of film, of equality needs to happen. So if these actors haven't been given an opportunity because they're giving them opportunities, that's not a bad thing. You know what I'm saying? Like if they're fit for the role and they know what they're doing, as long as they're not just given the role, it's for no reason, but they're like, you know what? Why don't we try giving this to a black actor that's really good? You know what I mean? See, how many times has that not been a thing? You know what I'm saying? If you could look back in the history and see, well, let's see, this is a great actor. They could have got this role, but because of their color, they didn't get the role. So do you have a problem with that as well? What are you trying to say? You know what I'm saying? So it's just really disheartening. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? It's weeds out the bad people. Like, you know what I'm saying? If you're bad, then you know what? I'll block you and move on with my life. You're gonna do what you're gonna do anyway, and you're gonna end up on the wrong side of history. I always tell people, don't end up on the wrong side of history.
Exactly.
Because then you're gonna look like a fool. It may not happen today, may not happen 5 years from now, but you're gonna end up on the wrong side of history.
And my favorite video of yours that you've done, I think ever, is you talking about, because something that really grinds my gears, I think is so ridiculous, is when people say, oh, Amazon's just making fan fiction. It's like, okay, but if it's not written by Tolkien, it's fan fiction, point blank. Like even the Peter Jackson adaptations, right?
Absolutely.
But because you like them and they're good fan fiction, then they count though. So it's like, oh, Amazon's making fan fiction, but Jackson changed so much, and he changed the timeline. He added new characters,
everything.
So, yeah, but because it's good, then it doesn't get to be called fan fiction because it's good, right? So my favorite video of yours is when you talk about the changes to Arwen and the elves showing up at Helm's Deep, because I think that kind of hits the nail right on the head. There are good characters and bad characters. Wokeness has nothing to do with it. Fan fiction has nothing to do with it. It's either good or it's bad, and you like it or you don't. And but what really kills me is the amount of energy people put into things they don't like is like shocking. Because it's like, if you don't like it, there's like literally billions of movies and books out there. Go check out one that seems interesting to you instead of spending all this time on one you hate.
What are you spending your time spewing hate? Let somebody else enjoy it. Like, I hate the Hobbit movies. But
which is interesting because I'm actually a Hobbit movie defender, and I love the book and I love the movie, which is interesting.
And that is cool. I absolutely love that you enjoy the Hobbit, that you found something you liked in it. So I'm not going to bad. Like I said, you ask me about it, that's what I'm going to say. But I'm not going to write this is da-da-da. I'm like, you know what? Cool. I'm glad that you found that, because I got to look at myself and say, you know what? Somebody who's never seen it might really enjoy and see perspectives and things that they're getting out of the movie that I'm not. I might be looking at something too harshly or too that. I'm glad that they enjoyed it. It made them a fan of something I love. The Hobbit is my favorite book. So I'm judging things that a casual user is not looking at. So I don't bash it. I just say I do bash it, but I bash it when it's time to bash it, in the sense of somebody's like specifically, taking it there. But when they say, like you just said, I'm not going to hang up the podcast and be like, you're a fake fan. This doesn't happen in the book, and this doesn't. No, man, that's awesome that you really enjoy those films, man. I have my reasons I don't enjoy it, but man, we're both fans of the franchise, and I'm so glad that you enjoy something that I love, man. And so only thing I might say to you is, man, if you think that is good, read the book. And you said you've already read the book.
Yes,
so,
I have, yeah.
Cool. You know what I'm saying? That's it. And then we can move forward and go on, and that's it. I don't got to... the world isn't over. It doesn't hurt me for you to like something that I don't. It's weird.
And I used to kind of be like a very adamant like Marvel movie hater. And now I've completely kind of like flipped the script, and like I actually quite enjoy the experience of them, because I
Yeah.
used to be like, they're so surface level, they don't have this emotional depth to them, and it's all just people cheering at like characters they know doing cool things. But then I realized one day, I was like, well, wait a second, if that is all it is, I'll take it for what it's worth. That actually is pretty exciting. And I was invited to see Endgame as part of a content collaboration, which is
Oh,
like,
nice.
the pinnacle of like their 10-year storyline. And the crowd was going crazy. And even though I didn't have the emotional attachment, I was like, okay, you know what? Like, this is actually a hella fun to be here. And just, so then I was like, you know what? Like, screw it. I'll go see Spider-Man No Way Home on opening night, because that's rumored to have all 3 Spider-Man. That'll be a really fun time. So even if I'm not like emotionally attached to the movies, I'm like, how can I kind of bash on like how fun this is as an experience to be here? So now I find myself going to all the Marvel movies opening night because of the fun aspect of it. Even if I don't get anything emotionally out of it, it's just a good time. You know?
Yeah, so the people that do enjoy and love The Hobbit, they're bringing and shedding light onto literature and media that I loved from someone that I admire so much. So screw that. I don't like it. I'm so glad that now we're able to get the Rings of Power series, because people enjoyed The Hobbit. There's people that actually enjoyed it and did like it. And regardless of it getting panned by other people, you know what? It did enough to keep the franchise going. And now we're getting more content. And hey, they can learn from things that I might think are mistakes. And then we get the best of both worlds.
And we're already seeing people learning from that with like the practical orc pictures got released,
Exactly.
right? They went, okay, people didn't like the CGI orcs. Let's go back to all practical. And now everyone's like loving it, right?
Okay. Hey, this was too much. Let's pull back with this and do that, and then we get an even better product. So that's what we're able to do, and we're better for it. So what I'm saying, as much as I hate The Hobbit, I love it too.
And yeah, so we'll loop back around to that in kind of the second half of the discussion here, because I want to talk about like kind of the art of adaptations and stuff like that.
Okay.
But so you were talking about to a degree you can understand people, if I heard the comment correctly, to a degree you can understand people's concern or defense for like the racial aspects of like the lore of like the Black Elves and all that stuff. So this is kind of a lore question for you, because I haven't read the Silmarillion. I don't know, right? If it's a genuine good faith argument where people are curious about how the world building, how they are going to justify, pardon like the term, the different racial traits in different elves and different hobbits and stuff like that, when prior in the Jackson films, we've only seen, white elves and hobbits, and all the darker toned people have been like the Haradrim from like the south or whatever. Lore wise, do you think they're going to address it by being like, well, I don't know, the lore. Is there some sort of canonically justification that you think they could have for like, or is there already that exists?
There already is. People just don't read.
You're the expert. Let us know. I'm curious.
There already is, and just people just don't read. So number one, my comment, I just want to make sure I'm not giving people too many license to run away. If somebody is genuinely like, well, this is what Tolkien meant, and they really think that is, and I'm not mad at them, as long as it's not in a racist tone, they're just like curious, and they're just like, well, wasn't this meant for this? And they just don't know any better. A lot of people don't know there was one emperor of Rome that actually ruled over Britannia and actually helped make the outline of the city of London. That's an actual fact. And he was black, and he's in a museum in England and everything. And that would be a part of English history, of course. So they're like, no black people, but you don't know what you're talking about. Before Britain was even England or anything, it was when it was becoming that, it was ruled by Rome, and it was a melting pot in a lot of sense, because it's predominantly white now and has all of these. Of course, absolutely, it's more white and everything, and people are migrating there and things, and that's exactly what happened. But still, other people being there is still a thing. So that still would be a part of the history and mythology. That's how that works. It's not just only the indigenous people. That's like somebody making a movie about the mythology of America and then it only being white people. That's not true. It's actually a melting pot. So it would be people from all different kind of places and things like that. When I went to London, it's literally all different races. I actually saw more people that weren't white than that were white. It's actually crazy. It's one of those places that's a melting pot. So, besides that, and obviously, of course, England is huge, and it's not just London, and, it's predominantly white, of course. But there is precedent in Lord of the Rings and also Tolkien's from South Africa, and he got many different he got inspired by many different races and cultures. You know, the dwarves are based upon Jewish people. You know what I'm saying? So, like, if that's your argument that there's no black people are bothering you because it's not accurate, then are you saying that shouldn't the dwarves bother you because they're short?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a physical trait being a color. It's one of your physical traits. So is being short. So, you know what I'm saying? You could be dark and you could be dark and short or tall or whatever. So all the dwarves are a certain height. And so does that bother you? Because Jewish people aren't typically just all short. And it definitely says that they're derived from them. You know what I'm saying? So what is really your problem? You know what I'm saying? So that doesn't make any sense. But back to what I was saying, the precedent is in the actual writing for, you know, there being people of color. Like you said, of course, in the Third Age, we talk about the Haradrim, we talk about the Easterlings, of course, and that's what people tend to focus on. But then we're not in the Third Age. So it says specifically the Harfoot hobbits are dark-skinned hobbits. Number one. So in the Second Age, or you know, these are proto-hobbits before the hobbits moved from Rovanian over west into, you know, Eriador. Obviously, that's why there's darker-skinned hobbits there. Also, the 7 clans of the dwarves. You know about one clan of dwarves. Maybe actually you know about 3 clans of dwarves. There's still 4 more. Aule made them based upon what he thought that the elves looked like. He didn't know. He based them upon what he made them, not Eru Iluvatar. Aule is the Smith god. He just made them. So there's 7 different fathers of dwarves, and they were all set in 7 different sundered places. So the dwarves that you know of from Khazad-dûm Durin was set in Mount Gundabad in the north. Other dwarves all everywhere else, the Blue Mountains, there were the Gray Mountains, there were the Iron Hills, they were in the south. There definitely could be dark-skinned dwarf, and they all integrated and migrated. Even in the Battle of Azanubazar, all 7 dwarf clans came back together to fight Azog and to avenge Thror. So there was intermixing. When Nagrod and Belagos fell, those dwarves went over to Khazad-dûm. There's intermixing, so absolutely there could be dark-skinned dwarves. Absolutely, it says in there. Also, men. The Easterlings that you know of in the Third Age are the men that are like east of Mordor and east of Gondor and over in Rune and things like that. But in the actual Silmarillion, in the First Age, the Easterlings are any men not of the 3 houses of the Edain that came over from the east and came over. They're all known as Easterlings. They were known as, they were very squat and sallow. These are darker-skinned people.
So yeah, Easterling's more of a cultural sort of summation as opposed to an actual racial group.
Absolutely, very similar to I'm just using this probably similar to like maybe Middle Eastern or like, you know, like tribal peoples like that.
Whereas Middle Eastern is an all-encompassing term for a collection of like countries in a region.
So they're dark skinned, and these people survived into the Second and Third Age after the fall of the Valyrians. So there can be black people. As far as elves go, it never says ever that the elves are only white. It doesn't say that. It says they're fair. Fair means beautiful. Like, people just need to understand the terms that Tolkien
and that's kind of a fucked up like racial like headcanon I think like white people have. White people have, but they're described as angelic beings. It's like you're saying black people aren't angelic beings. Like it's a very fucked up little dynamic.
I don't even get mad. It's a misinterpretation. It's as simple as people's misinterpretation of Gandalf saying, "Fly, you fools." Fly is an old English term for run, escape, flee. That's what that means, not the literal term that we use now for actually fly. So when people say, "Oh, he said fly," did he mean flying the eagles? No. If you go back into the language that they're using, fly means to just run, escape, flee. That's what he meant. Same thing with fair. Most times when we use fair, it's like lighter tone now. Fair in the sense of that, or, you know, justice wise. But back then, it's fair is beautiful. That's all it means. Beautiful. It doesn't mean dark, light, you know, anything like that. The elves are literally described by their hair color more than anything. That is it. Their hair color describes the elves, not their skin color. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? The
Yeah.
people that we know of in the Third Age are definitely, have white skin and things like that. Cool. There's no problem. I'm not erasing that. Nobody ever changed any main character. Gandalf wasn't turned into a black guy. You know what I'm saying? Aragorn is not a black guy. None of that. None of that happened. So I don't know where this uproar. They just don't know their history. They don't
And
know what they're talking about.
isn't Aragorn sort of described as like olive skinned? I that sticks out in my head.
Yeah,
I could be
absolutely.
wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Aragorn is he's very tall. I ain't gonna say dark skinned. He's definitely probably Caucasian, but
When I read the
like
book,
a
the image I got in my head was like closer to something of like a Native American or something. And I think that might be because I watched the animated film as a child a lot,
yeah.
whereas Aragorn's just like presentation in that, like the Bakshi version, he has kind of like a brownish tone. So I always in
Yeah, he
my
does. He
head
does.
canon had him as sort of like native aesthetic looking.
Yeah, he had, and we got to be careful. We're taking iterations of what we think he looks like from things we've seen.
Yeah.
Bakshi's film, obviously Peter Jackson's film, all of this stuff. Even the drawings that were made by the Hildebrand brothers, like those are all actually terrible, not terrible drawings, but terrible adaptations of what Tolkien wrote. They had like a jacked elves with like Conan looking because they're used to drawing that way. So, you know what I'm
Like
saying?
a
Like,
high fantasy aesthetic is kind of ingrained in
exactly.
our
That was the
minds.
aesthetic back then. People aren't diving that deep. So when they see it, they're like, that's what it's supposed to look like. No, this is what they had available to them, and these were the best artists then, or whatever the case, so that they got them to draw the elves or whatever. And then it happened. Most of the time, Tolkien didn't even approve some of the stuff that was out, except for a few specific artists or whatever. So, it is what it is. But yeah, I thought of him like looking more like Italianish, Sicilian, that type, dark skin, like he was from an island in the Mediterranean. Is how I thought of it.
Yeah.
That's how I looked at it. You know what I'm saying? But your thought on it is very true as well. You know what I'm saying? Because many people it's funny because a lot of people confuse Puerto Ricans who are indigenous in their own right and mixed in people with Italian people. They're very similar as far as their skin tone and things like that. A lot of people confuse those people, So, you think about that. It goes in line with what you're saying and what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, if people really want to get like that deep into it, it's not something where like Game of Thrones, which is like a very strict, rigid, like I don't want to call Lord of the Rings like a loose fantasy, but like Game of Thrones they're very clear about like the high realism.
Yeah.
So they make a point to be like such and such emigrated from here
Absolutely.
into here. Whereas if you want to get that deep into it and if you're that upset about the skin tone of certain characters, a quick mental fix is literally just be like, it's not hard to imagine some black character from Lord of the Rings, wherever they came from, came to the north, mated with someone, they had a child, boom, there you go. That's the lore right there for why there's black characters in this. It's really not that deep is what it comes down to. But yeah, so we got 3 minutes left before I got to send a new link to a next meeting for you here. But I'll squeeze in a last question here before I send the new one. So I think you once said your favorite kind of moments in Tolkien's writings is when he describes the fear of the Nine that they instill in people. What is it specifically, do you think, about because I was shocked when I read Lord of the Rings how kind of not horror-esque, well, maybe a little bit, but because Stephen King is my favorite author, right? Like I've read like a ton of Stephen King, and I find he actually lacks the most in his horror elements, and he shines the most in his characterization of people. But what is it about Tolkien's writing style with that specifically you think just shines out above the rest? Because I'll get into it later, but I have my favorite Tolkien moments, and it's definitely completely different tone than yours.
It's just when you feel it when you're reading it, and I'm scared, but it's not super descriptive in a sense like, oh, it was like this dark, sharp teeth. Coldness came. Not trying to scare you, but in a sense, he's leaving little breadcrumbs that are terrifying. Whereas I know somebody's scared of somebody when they won't say somebody's name. And and Aragorn's, don't say that. Don't say that out loud. You know what I'm saying? He tells Frodo when they're talking about Gilgalad, the fall of Gilgalad, and he's like, "Oh, from Mordor," and they're haphazardly saying it like it's okay. And Aragorn, don't say that. Like he's scared, and I'm scared that he's scared because I'm like, what on earth? The way he does that, he plants little seeds, and you know what I'm saying? Like his villains, like they're not even really attacking you all like that in a sense until the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and things like that. But he's terrible. He's like, even the wise fear the nine when they're all gathered behind their fell chieftain. What? Like, but you just fought off the nine. He's like, nah, I'm still, listen, I'm still scared I'm Gandalf and I'm scared of this guy. You know what I'm saying? Like he's a great sorcerer of old. And then when the people actually do get, their blood, turns cold and they flee from the battlefield. And it's like, man, this is different. This is a different type of fear.
Yeah. And it's almost like it comes like, it's like a third party fear. Cause they're not saying here's why the nine are scary. It's you,
exactly.
You know, these strong warriors, you respect them. You're like, oh, these guys are the best of the best. And they say, this is not something to be taken lightly. And you think, okay, you fill in the blanks, right? You're saying with the breadcrumbs. So yeah, I was saying, my favorite aspects of Tolkien's writing are very, very different to yours. And I think my two favorite scenes are very telling of that. My favorite scene in the entire, what I've read of his 2.5 books I've completed is when the Fellowship arrives at Lothlorien. And then when Gildor takes in Sam and Frodo for the night at the fire, those are my two favorite parts, and both chapters make me cry each time because it's just I don't even know how to describe it. Like when I read when I watch Lord of the Rings and when I read the books, it feels like I'm like at home with an old friend or something. Like that's kind of the vibe that I get. And when you were talking about how no one else really read Lord of the Rings when you were a kid, that's what it made me think of. Is that, well, that's a good book to have if you don't have anyone else who's really into it, because there's such a sense of fellowship in the book. But those are my two favorite parts, and I can't say enough about why I love those. But yeah.
That's interesting because I was going to mention the Gildor part as an explanation for the fear thing as well. So one of the most telling parts in the entire story to me is when Gildor is going along and he's talking to Frodo and they're having a great conversation. You get great camaraderie. You get a great sense of who the elves are as a people, that they want to help, that they know a lot, that they're very knowledgeable, all that stuff. And you're like, wow, this is really cool, awesome. Until Frodo says Gandalf was late. Gildor pauses. I do not like this. I don't like this. That right there is setting up like, what? So wait, this is crazy. So what is going on again? Like the way Gandalf would be late. And when he said something about the nine, Gandalf didn't tell you about them? Don't stop to them. Don't run, flee when you see them. Don't, it was awesome. He didn't say what they do. He said, Gandalf didn't tell you about them? He didn't explain nothing about them. He said, don't talk to them, nothing, run when you see them. You know what I'm saying? And that was like, wow, man, what is going on? It's spooky, it's scary. It's like, wow, it really sets up everything. And then Sauron is their master. So he must be far greater than, you know what I'm saying? Like, I really thought that in the movie, they did an excellent job. When they're running from the orcs, they don't know that a Balrog is there. And all of a sudden, the orcs run, they're scared of something. And they say, what's this new devilry? It's not like he just started explaining. His face dropped to the ground, Gandalf's face, and he was like, and he's just said about, he didn't explain what it really was like that. Just a demon of the ancient world. This foe is beyond any of you. Run. He was like, oh, guys, this is that. He didn't really get into it. His face dropped. When they did an excellent job of Boromir doing the Council of Elrond explaining Mordor. That was something that was added that's not in the book, but it was probably the best insertion into that movie, because we don't know as a new person watching how Mordor is, why is it such a problem to go there? Why can't they just do this? Why isn't it just an easy task? One does not simply walk in the boom and then he goes, and he doesn't go crazy, but at the simple descriptions and the pain in his face, he's holding his face when when he's saying it's like it hurts him and pains him to even talk about it. And he's looking
Yeah.
at them like, you're crazy. This is craziness. What are you talking about? Because it is. If you know and read the text, that is literally insanity. And that's on to another one of my topics where Boromir was completely 100% right in his thought process and everything he was even trying to do. He was 100% right and he wasn't wrong at all. You know what I'm saying? Ultimately, he was wrong for trying to take the ring because of what the ring would ultimately do to man. But he wasn't wrong for his thought process on doing it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my favorite things about watching, Lord of the Rings every like 6 months. I think I watch it. I think one of my favorite things is as a child, I hated Boromir so much because I couldn't see past that. Like, he was trying to. Oh, did this meeting just? Sorry. Okay, my meeting like closed for a second. So yeah, when I couldn't see past Boromir's kind of dark side. But every viewing, I realize more and more like what a hero he is and what like an honorable kind of guy he is.
Exactly.
And I watch it and I'm like, this guy has such a beautiful character. His struggle for, he wants to be this like great like hero for his people, and he is rightfully kind of thinking it's ludicrous to try and destroy this like weapon.
Absolutely right. That's not wrong. Like, he doesn't know. Yeah, so I don't mean to even cut you off. Apologize, but
no, it's all good.
Absolutely is like that. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and it is really. If you really think about it, he's talking to people who know way more than him as far as when the ring's existence, but he's actually in the mix in the melee, whereas none of them are in the mix of the melee. They're living okay.
Yeah.
Like even Gandalf has been through this, that, and the third, but he was chilling in the Shire for quite a while. He's chilling here, he's chilling there, he's doing this. He is born and raised in Gondor, which is a stone's throw away from Mordor.
It's like literally the last line of defense, right?
It's the last. They're pressing.
Or the first line of defense, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, the first line of defense, and Mordor is pressing its advantage, and he literally is protecting the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? He's like, what are you guys talking about?
The reason the Fellowship works so well too is because every single person, every choice they make is like completely justified. And one of my favorite fantasy characters of all time is actually Jaime Lannister, because I love his dynamic kind of twist on like the hero knight of, he killed the Mad King to save his people.
It's completely justified.
But he's now known as this betrayer because his sole duty was to protect the king. But then it's always funny to me how in the last season of Game of Thrones they like destroy his character when he says, "I never cared for the people." Says, "I never cared much for the people of King's Landing." That's your whole arc, is that you do care for the people. But that's why he's like my favorite kind of fantasy archetype, and I love the twist on him. And Boromir is kind of in that same vein for me, as a guy who is trying to do the right thing for his people and kind of gets a bad rap for it. I mean, Jaime has a whole other slew of unethical reasons to hate him.
Things,
but in terms of just his knight duties and what they do with that, yeah. And I love Boromir more and more every time I watch it and every time I read it. So yeah, I just think there's everything about it I love. But you were talking about how one of your favorite additions to that Peter Jackson added was that that Boromir line. And I actually, in my notes here, have a question. And I wanted to ask, what is your favorite, not addition, but straight up change that Jackson made to the films?
My favorite change that Jackson made. You know what? I answered this the other day, and I get so many questions that now it's gonna escape me. My favorite change that Jackson made.
I have mine if you want some inspiration to get
let me hear yours.
So my favorite change that he made is, I always thought in The Lord of the Rings, when I read the book, Gandalf makes such a statement about the ring is so dangerous, they need it now. And then you wait 11 years before they leave the Shire. It kind of, to me, I understand why he did it, to make Gandalf's task seem like Herculean and the hunt for Gollum and all that. But to me, it takes the kind of the urgency out of, well, it's been 11 years and nothing's happened. Couldn't they just keep the ring hidden for indefinitely? So I really love that Jackson made it happen like over the like a week later Gandalf comes back or however long it is, because it says this is urgent, this needs to happen now. And when Frodo gets stabbed with the blade, I think it takes him like 28 days to get to Rivendell in the book, but in the movie it's like a couple days of riding. It does make the world seem smaller, I know, but I like, because it seems like, okay, anything could go wrong at any second, whereas in the book I'm like, well, they just spent a month doing this, then they spent a month at Rivendell. I really love the urgency of the films, because I feel like the threat is constant. There's not a second to relax.
I can see that. I can see that. I disagree, because I'm looking at it from a different standpoint.
I'm curious what you have to say, because you might know justifications for why it's better to have it longer, because you know every insect of lore, right? So
but for a movie wise, you're absolutely right. So my justifications only work for the book wise, which is something I had to learn talking to several other people, whereas I saw things in that they could be done this way and that way, but for the movie, it doesn't necessarily build right. So you're absolutely right. So even though I know the reasons why it works in the literature, for a film, you're absolutely right. It does work. You know what I'm saying? So my favorite change is that they took out. It's not something they put in. Something that they took out was Tom Bombadil. Now, most people love Tom Bombadil. Like, why did they? It moves the story forward nowhere. It absolutely does not help the story forward. It actually creates a lot of problems that they put Tom Bombadil in. So it's not something that they took that they put in that they took out.
Yeah,
The Tom Bombadil. It actually helps the story move forward. It doesn't bog it down. It doesn't confuse you. It doesn't give you all these unanswerable questions. That then why you're like, well, why didn't they just give the ring to him? Why didn't this guy just do this? Why didn't they? The same thing with Glorfindel, even though I think they should have put Glorfindel in there, but that's
I love Glorfindel, and I haven't read Silmarillion, which I know is like his badass moments are in that.
What? So. Yeah, what? Glorfindel is one of the guys. He's one of the guys, man. I can't wait till you read the Silmarillion, because then we can really get into it. And
we'll circle back and do a part two for sure.
We'll definitely do a part two. But yeah, so Tom Bombadil being taken out is absolutely that is the best thing Peter Jackson did. And even though a lot of people are going to be like, why? Absolutely, the best thing he did was taking him out.
Yeah,
as far as putting it in, I'd say the Boromir moment, that descriptiveness, it sets up the tone for where you're going and why it's a hard task. You could just be going to some place and, they'd be like, well, we could, it's Mordor. It doesn't mean anything unless someone really sets that up. And now you're like, well, you definitely can't go there. Like, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too, like Tom Bombadil it's a great moment of like world building and adding a grander scope and introducing kind of a fun like magic system. I think too, taking out the Barrow Wights made sense because people, I think, would confuse them with the Ring Wraiths and be like, are these the same thing or what's going on? It is a great moment where the Wights like they're trapped in the woods and all that and stuff. I guess that is part of the Tom Bombadil sequence, but I think that also made sense to remove because it's a lot of the same of what we're already seeing with the Nine. But do you have a least favorite change?
My least favorite change, what was it? Certain things I absolutely. Oh my God.
I think a lot of people would say taking out Tom Bombadil would be their least favorite change too, which is funny.
No, that's my favorite change. My least favorite change was I answer these questions and it's I can't remember them right when you're on the spot like this. I'll give some of my least favorite changes. All right, so absolutely hate that they had the elves go to, in the Two Towers, they had the elves go to Helm's Deep. I did not like that. It takes away from their plight. It builds their strength up and it doesn't show that they actually were on their own. I don't like the changing of taking out the character of Erkenbrand at all. It bothers me because, you show all this stuff about the Westfold. You have Theoden with the line. You have the kids coming from the Westfold. You have all these things setting up, the Westfold, and you could easily have had Éomer fighting with them, fighting with Aragorn. That still gives, viewing to Éomer and stuff. And then have Erkenbrand, just all you have to do is mention that, oh, he's the leader of the Westfold. We don't know where he is. And Gandalf goes, finds him. Now we're like, Erkenbrand. They talk about Helm Hammerhand, and that all you have to do in the book, it says he's like the likeness of Helm Hammerhand come again. Say that in 5 seconds. Say that. Where I wish Erkenbrand was here. But nobody knows since the Westfold fell. He's the marshal of the Westfold. Da 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 da. If we had him, we'd be in better shape. Gandalf goes and gets him. Now it's Erkenbrand. Now another great character. Boom. It doesn't take away. You could take away tiny little scenes like Aragorn falling off the cliff and doing all. Take that out. You know what I'm saying? And then
because that is kind of inconsequential in the bigger picture. Like Aragorn falls, they think he's dead for a bit, and it gives us a nice aha moment to see he's alive. Yeah. For sure.
My absolute. When they took out the wolves, the taking out the wolves fight, when they fight before Khazad-dûm, before they actually get to the gates of Moria, there's a fight on the hill with the wolves. I think that was like a huge missed opportunity.
You made a TikTok about this recently, I think.
Yes, that is absolutely my biggest change that I hate the most. Absolutely, 100% that.
That is really interesting because when I read the book, I didn't really think much of that scene. I thought, okay, it's just an action scene.
Yeah, it's an action scene, but it showcases Gandalf's power, and it shows that they're really being pursued, just like you said. Well, it's the urgency. The urgency was greater for them because of that, them being chased. They just came off the mountain. Oh, we could skip to Malud to go to Moria, no problem. But that wasn't the case. They had to immediately go. They couldn't take no chances. It shows they're being watched. It lends more credence to the urgency that they were in, that they couldn't go here. They couldn't just haphazardly go. They had Boromir saying in the book, he's literally saying, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this?
It justifies Frodo in going through the mountain.
Yeah, like, well, we can't, bro. We cannot, instead of just saying it. We don't know as readers why we really can't. He just said the passage south is being watched. Well, there's 8,000 ways to travel somewhere. You know what I'm saying? But if there's wolf chase, you got to get out of sight. You got to move. You got to go where they can't go. Boom. Lends credence to that and makes sense. And it was a beautiful action sequence. Shows Gandalf's power and his importance. And you know what I'm saying? When he throws that log in the air, it's just a moment where it's like, wow. Boom, you know what I'm saying? So it would have been perfect, you know what I'm saying? Perfect.
For sure. So, on the topic of changes to movies and taking in, putting out, this brings us naturally to discussion of the Hobbit films. So kind of I don't love the Hobbit book as much as you do. I enjoy Fellowship a lot more. And it could just be because, the target demographic is more for younger people. And I didn't read it when I was young. I didn't get into reading until 2 years ago. I hadn't read anything for pleasure ever in my life. So, but I think the Hobbit movie, a lot of people complain that they added all this and it didn't need to be 3 movies. And that's a complaint. I do think 2 would have been the optimal number for it.
No, I think they could have done 3 movies. The 3 movies don't bother me. It's the stuff that they try to do, and they fail at it. They do a terrible job at certain things. Now, do they add aspects that were in the Hobbit and in the Lord of the Rings that make it a more, representation of Middle Earth? Absolutely. And then you get a bigger picture. But in that bigger picture, you're messing up what we're seeing. So the simple thing, you're trying to create drama so bad that people shoot themselves in the foot sometimes. The X-Men franchises did this, where they add the Juggernaut, where they have the Dark Phoenix. Now they're trying to, throw all these people in there, and they're looking for drama, making drama, but they're changing things that then making the Juggernaut a mutant. Well, drama is, the Juggernaut is Professor X's brother. That's drama in itself. So leave that how it is, and that creates a drama and a whole nother problem. And then boom, instead of you trying to create this drama by making them, and then it doesn't make sense and everybody's mad at you. Okay, Azog's dead. You don't need Azog. You have Bolg. Bolg is the antagonist in the end of The Hobbit, in the Battle of the Five Armies. We don't see him before that, but if you want to imply that he was chasing them, that makes more sense than bringing someone who we know is dead in the reason Bolg is even in the Battle of the Five Armies is to avenge his father and to avenge the fall of the Great Goblin. So don't bring a dead person back to life and have him. Now we're just like, what? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I think going back to the 3 movies thing, at least I'm glad to hear you say that 3 movies is fine, because a number one complaint is when they do make an adaptation is, oh, they cut out this, they cut out this, you can't fit all of it into a single movie. Everyone says that, and then I see a lot of people say, The Hobbit's a short children's book, it shouldn't be 3 movies. I
They absolutely
disagree.
could have done the
And
3 movies. Yeah.
Now, I think Legolas being in the Hobbit movies, now, I'm not saying what they did with him in his story arc, but I do think having him in the movie makes sense, because it's the same thing like you said about his mom. She's not mentioned by name, but Tolkien hadn't written Legolas yet. But if they're at, it's like if someone shot a movie at my house and I never showed up,
Yeah.
It's like
Absolutely, that makes sense
Legolas
for
lives
Legolas to be
in
there.
Mirkwood. It would make sense for him to be there,
He's
because
the Prince of Mirkwood. Absolutely. Certain things, most things in it, like I said, make sense, except Azog is dead. He's dead for hundreds of years. That's just, you literally are just being silly now. Then they go to Angmar's grave. The Witch King doesn't die. That's not how he didn't get buried. He ruled over Angmar and was chased out of Angmar, and then they discovered he was one of the 9. So he didn't die, and then they buried him, and that's not what happened. He had one of the rings of power. He just faded in his shadow and turned into the Witch King. So that literally is just, it's muddying and mucking up the other story. You could mention Angmar and say all that stuff and say that, well, this is possibly one of the 9. That's exactly what they thought. They thought that the Ulari were in Dol Guldur. But why would you go to his grave when he doesn't die? That's not how that happened. So now you're adding an element into that's cool, but then you're making it problematic because it doesn't work with the rest of the lore. It's just not what happens. So then, you know what I mean? So then you're causing a problem. Elves and dwarves would never mate and that would never happen. And it's not a racial thing in that sense, but literally it's written
the
that
love
way
triangle,
specifically because of a certain thing. It's written that way because of this is one of the things that's completely written very purposefully. Eru didn't like that Aule made the dwarves before the elves woke up, and without his permission. So he kind of spitefully was like, they're not going to get along. Like, they're not going to, this isn't going to be a thing. The dwarves are going to be hard-headed and stubborn like you, and he made them that way for a certain reason anyway. All these things with the dwarves. So to have that happen in there just defeats the purpose of the whole story in The Hobbit, and then in the story in the Silmarillion and in the Lord of the Rings, the importance of Legolas's and Gimli's friendship. It just
takes away from that. And same with Gimli going to Lothlorien as well. Getting the hair strands, and they have to put the bag over his head. So I think too, what this also is adding up to is, the source material I've only ever read has been Hobbit Fellowship, Half of Two Towers. So I get to watch the movie with no interference of lore. I just watch it as they present it to me and assume it's fine. So I think that is a difference too, because I have nothing to compare it to. And a good example is, have you read any Stephen King?
Yeah, a few things. So
The Dark Tower is his massive fantasy piece. I don't know if you've ever read that, but I can't recommend it enough because it's inspired by Stephen King said he read Lord of the Rings and wanted to write his own, but waited because he knew if he wrote it, it would just be a clone. And then he saw The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Western movie, and said, what if I did Lord of the Rings set in a fantasy that was the Wild West? That's Dark Tower. So they made a Dark Tower movie, and a guy once said to me, oh, I really enjoyed that Dark Tower movie, which I think is one of the worst adaptations I've ever seen, because they take 7 books and make it one picture. But if you didn't know anything about the world or the lore, you would have nothing to disappoint you, right? So I think that's kind of why I can watch The Hobbit and be like, oh, this is pretty fun. Like, I don't see any negatives with it, right? So yeah, when the guy said that about Dark Tower to me, I was like, buddy, this is 7 books, all like 900 pages. And so, yeah, I think that's where that wavelength is. But he's like, yeah, but I don't know that. I just watched a cool cowboy dimension hopping who was a gunslinger. And I was like, okay, that's fair enough. So it's kind of like just a flavor of the week fantasy movie. But, on the topic of Stephen King, you once said in an interview that you've tried to read other people, but you haven't seen anyone come close to Tolkien's writing. Who are some other authors that you enjoy?
Absolutely, C.S. Lewis. I love his writing as well. Obviously, I do like Martin's writing. Game of Thrones is a great writing. the Wizard of Oz is a great book. Like there's great books that are out there, but the writing is nowhere near the descriptiveness and the Easter egg. Like he was the original master of the Easter egg. When you read the Silmarillion, you're gonna be like, get the F out of here. Like this is masterful. Like it is crazy. Like he's the original. He's the GOAT. And I just haven't seen. I've seen people now. It's easy to follow someone's work and then do it and then try to surpass it. That's easy because you already have you know, a structure to start off of, and that's what Martin and other writers have done. And it's like, okay, I can make this deeper than what the Lord of the Rings is. But if you don't get that same feeling, then the person failed. And no offense to any of those authors, because they have massive fans and Harry Potter and all of that, but they will all tell you they are inspired by Tolkien, and there wouldn't be any of those books if it wasn't for the Lord of the Rings. And this is literally damn near every book. Like there would be no, even George Lucas with Star Wars said he was inspired by Lord of the Rings. Just like you said, Stephen King is inspired by Lord of the Rings. Martin is inspired by Lord of the Rings. Literally, there would be no Harry Potter if there was. She said that absolutely she was inspired by Lord of the Rings. You can see it in every character is something from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
From the Mentors or the Nine, you can see a bunch of things. It's just ridiculous.
It's almost like kind of like a 0 point of like, because I watch a lot of, you know, YouTubers with like top 10 fantasy. They don't even include Lord of the Rings sometimes because they say Lord of the Rings is like the bar, right? He's like, so like Daniel Green, right? I don't know if you watch him, but he does a lot of like Wheel of Time content, and he did his top 10 fantasy list, and every year he says, I'm not mentioning Lord of the Rings because it's spot number 0. If Wheel of Time is 1, Lord of the Rings is 0. Like it's,
and I'm getting into the Wheel of Time as well.
So my reading pattern is always I read 2 books at once usually because I find it keeps my pace better. Because sometimes I'm not in the mood to read a certain book. I like to have another one to go to. So I always am reading a Stephen King and then another book on the side. But yeah, so I forget what I had a lead-in question there. Oh, you're talking about C.S. Lewis and all that. So you're very much into like, you know, high fantasy and that kind of classic stuff. Are there any like newer, do you dip into like Brandon Sanderson at all or like Dresden Files or anything or?
These are things that I'm starting to read, and you know, even something as like even World War Z. I just read World War Z.
Yeah,
I love Greek mythology. That's
Max Brooks is a fun author too. Like he did a zombie survival guide, which is like.
Yeah. I just read this book, Cersei.
Yeah, that's on everyone's list.
This is a great book. One of my favorite books in the world is Grendel. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Beowulf, but it's from Grendel's perspective, and it blew my mind. Absolutely loved it. You know, certain books like that. I mean, I love so many different types of books. But fantasy is going to be always my number one. It's a mechanism for escape for me. We're in the real world already. I can read biographies and certain things, and they're fine. But as you know, it's a way for me to be like, wow, this could never happen. But what if I can imagine a dragon? I can imagine, you know, these powerful beings, and many of the people I grew up around, they like watching, you know, certain type of films, gangster movies, and this, that, and the third. I think it's the most gangsterous thing on earth for a guy with a sword to be fighting the army of 1,000, and it's one of him. And I try to, I'm like, yo, man, because they're like, oh, we don't want to watch this swords and all of this. This is from the old times, and they're just thinking about it wrong. But then when they actually get to it and they see it, it's like they actually see it. They're like, what? Why didn't you tell me about this? I've been telling you about this for 20 years.
Exactly. And fantasy is the medium they use to tell a story. And just the tools they use, right? Like, so my mom, I've been trying to get her to watch Lord of the Rings since I was born, essentially, right? And I have the Moria door tattooed across my whole body here, right?
Oh, so nice.
When I got that, I said to my mom, I was like, I'm getting this tattooed on my body. Like, you have to watch it now. And she said, no. So I finally got her to watch it. So I'm from Toronto. They're doing they run a concert series here where they play the movies on a movie theater screen with a live symphony orchestra doing the soundtrack. So they just mute the audio track, but they keep the dialogue and sound effects and all that, but the soundtrack is muted. So a live band's playing it. They're doing Fellowship of the Ring. So I bought my mom tickets, and I was like, this is going to be the most special first time viewing for you. But anyways, yeah, I love getting people into Lord of the Rings, and when they ask me what it's about, I'm like, don't even worry about it, like, because I'm gonna say all these terms like wizard and magical ring. It's just about the power of friendship, really, at the end of the day. So that's kind of how I sell it to people. But going back to other authors we like and stuff like that, I read the first Game of Thrones book, and my problem with not problem, just one thing I struggle with Martin. I love the story he's telling, the sequence of events, the characters. I just don't like his prose and the words he chooses. It's kind of Tolkien-esque, but it's like a staler version to me. So I find it's always a grind for me to get through Game of Thrones. But because I love everything that's happening, and it's so unpredictable, and the characters are doing this and that, but the words he's using to tell the story, I'm like, just not into. Whereas Stephen King, on the other hand, he could tell a story about a guy going to the bathroom, and it'd be the most exciting 10 pages because he tells it with such a flair, you know? But so yeah, I can't recommend Dark Tower enough, because Stephen King has described Dark Tower as, and you were saying how Silmarillion is like Easter eggs like everywhere. Yeah. Well, every single Stephen King book, every one of them is canon to Dark Tower, which is really interesting, because you're probably thinking like, well, they're not all fantasy. Like, how does that work? Well, believe me.
I've heard this. A friend is trying to get me into the Dark Tower series, and I've read a couple. I haven't read the whole thing, and I'm preparing myself. So I'm on it. I'm slowly but surely. Now,
awesome. My favorite description he's ever said was that all of his books are like a trough that flow into the Dark Tower, is like the center of them. I thought that was a really beautiful way to put it. But so we're coming up on the tail end here. I know you've been working crazy hours, and you were moving around today, so I'll wrap it up in the next 10 minutes. So I always let me make sure I haven't skipped over any questions here. Oh, all right. So I've got two kind of questions left for you here. Have you ever listened to the band Blind Guardian?
I've been told to listen to the band Blind Guardian. I haven't gotten around to it yet, and I know that they do some Lord of the Rings content.
Yeah.
So same thing with what's the band? Man, a lot of bands actually were inspired by
so many. But Led Zeppelin's the other big one.
Led Zeppelin, that's what I was. Yeah, Led Zeppelin. And they have songs and things like that. So rock isn't my genre, but I definitely want to give it a try and try to decipher and listen to. And I've seen even the Beatles had songs. The Beatles wanted to make a movie
with Kubrick, which would have been nuts.
Would have been crazy. So I definitely I'm aware of that, and I'm going to give those things a listen.
For sure.
I'm a deep, super lore book person, so the music aspects in the books, 100% there. To recite them, the poems and everything. The music that was inspired by, I haven't really gone and listened to it yet, but I'm going to definitely get around to it, because that's important to know that as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. And I think so. They don't just do Lord of the Rings as well. Like they have a song called Wheel of Time, which is like, and they incorporate full symphony orchestra into their music, which is really cool as well. But their big album that you would like is called Nightfall in Middle-earth, which is the entire story of Silmarillion, top to bottom, which I actually haven't listened to because spoilers. But so,
man, when I'll tell you, I was literally going to tell you that you need to read the Silmarillion. Like I tell people this. I say the Hobbit's my favorite just because of the simplicity of the story, and from front to back, it's a full adventure, complete fun. You really love Bilbo. Great. The Lord of the Rings is I don't even know how to describe it. It's technically it's better than The Hobbit, of course, but The Hobbit's my favorite because of a certain reason, because of the completeness of that. But the Lord of the Rings is like the springboard, like it gets you, like this is what you need to read for everything else, and you need to read them backwards. So even though The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings go in order, then you need to read the Silmarillion. Never try to read the Silmarillion first.
Yeah.
Because when you read the Silmarillion, you are literally going to be like, get the out of here. Everything it explains everything, and you need to learn it that way as opposed to the other way. It's really cool in that way, and it's really deep, and it's characters, and then you understand. And then my boy Sauron is one of my favorite characters. Beside him and the Witch King are my favorite. And
Mm-hmm.
like Sauron is my guy. Like you, a newfound respect for him. You understand the peril. Like it's just, oh my God, Morgoth, everything, the elves. You understand, you know that everything is in all peachy keen with just all the elves, and everything isn't just, oh, the elves are so great. No, it's crazy. The stuff you find out. You'll have a newfound respect for the dwarves and their abilities, and you'll see why the relationships don't. That's not a thing. Like that's not a. You know what I mean? There has been great friendships with dwarves and elves, but there are very strong reasons as to why they're not okay
Yeah.
with each other, and it resounds through history, and Tolkien writes it and knows this from the way he read it. So when Gimli's in there, he's like, yeah, you locked me up, but it's deeper than that. It's deeper than that. It's way deeper than that. And he writes little things like, and the elves did not forget it. And it's
Mm-hmm.
things like that. Like the elves did not forget this, and why they only deal with certain groups of men and not other groups of men that you're not realizing, but you'll see in the Lord. You're like, you know what? They're only dealing with these men. They don't really mess with the other men like that. And there's a
Yeah.
reason for it. And Numenor and all of these things. And you'll be like, wow, it'll give you such a broader picture and such an intricate and it's just so much. There's so much. It's so deep in the landscapes. Like it'll drown you. It will literally drown you. Like it is the hardest book on earth to read. It'll drown you. But once you get it, once you can breathe underwater,
Yeah.
you don't want to get out of the water.
You got me fired up, man. Like I'm ready to go. I'm reading The Terror right now by Dan Simmons, and then Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. But I have the edition I have of Silmarillion is it's fully illustrated by Ted Nasmith.
Nice,
So
nice,
that'll
nice.
that'll keep me going. And
Yeah,
it's like I think it's like the I don't know whateverth anniversary. It's got this. It's big like hardcover too, and it's got the painting. I don't know what the painting is of because I haven't read the books. I don't know the context, but it's like this nice green bay and these white ships coming in.
yeah,
And a lot of illustrated editions kind of cheap out with like maybe you get like 10 illustrations in there. Every like I think there's something like 80 illustrations in this full Ted Nasmith paintings, and
yeah.
they're beautiful. Do you have a favorite Ted Nasmith painting or any Lord of the Rings illustration?
Yeah, man, there is a painting by Ted Naismith. It might be the one you're actually talking about, but there is something called the kinslaying that's in the book, and it's literally he paints it, and literally uh if you read the story, you'll know why it's one of my favorites because it's tragic, and he does a really good job of conveying what's going on. And yeah, man, I don't want to spoil it because if
Yeah.
I say it, it'll spoil some stuff. So that's one of my favorites. There's others as well, but yeah, like read it, man. If you need an audiobook version, I always recommend the Martin Shaw version.
Yeah.
He,
I've got
he
all the audiobook editions for all three books, and
yeah,
I just got the new ones they did with Andy Serkis as well.
yeah.
So
So the Silmarillion, get the one read by Martin Shaw. He does an amazing job of conveying the emotion in the story and the urgency of certain things and the battles that are described. You'll have a newfound respect for Tolkien and everything. And oh my goodness, it's so good, so good and
is
difficult.
is Nasmith your favorite illustrator for the Tolkien verse?
No, actually, I find that some of my favorite are random people that just do
Nice.
things. Naismith is a good artist and great, and he's synonymous with the Lord of the Rings. But as far as like my thought process on what things should look like, he doesn't always necessarily hit it for me. But there
Fair
are
enough.
people, artists, and things like that's how that I imagine that. But he does a great job. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
just
yeah.
me. So I'm not putting my thought process onto if somebody else loves it and thinks that is the best, that is completely understandable.
It kind of
And by all
depends on
means,
which piece too. Like like Alan Lee. Like I love kind of like the gothicness to his, and there's like a
yeah,
wispy aura to his.
yeah,
But yeah, a lot of the illustrations I really like too are some of the weirder ones where the hobbits are almost more like animalistic looking, and they're like kind of hunched
Some
over.
weird
And
things going on. Yeah, so that's what loses it for me with certain things. But he's still a great artist and everything like that. But
yeah, for sure. Final question I want to get into before we end off today. What is your favorite movie, or some movies you love if you don't have one nailed down?
well, my favorite movies are number one would be John Wick, then The Lord of the Rings. Definitely The Fellowship is my favorite out of the three. And then definitely like drama wise, absolutely Unforgiven by Clint Eastwood. And then like an action comedy type of thing. Action wise would be definitely Snatch by Guy Ritchie. And then comedy wise, I think actually it would be Superbad. So
That is another great one. Superbad, tremendous. I'm a big Bill Hader fan, actually. I'm just finished watching the show Barry. If you haven't seen that, check it out. But
check it out.
no, Snatch is a great answer. My brother, who's a super fan of yours, he was so excited that I was having you on the podcast. He loves Snatch. I think it's like in his top favorite movies of all time.
It should be, man. The cinematography, the editing, the
editing is
storytelling.
crazy in that movie
It's
too. Actually,
literally the action, the actors, oh man, it was just the little subtle things that is just that movie is a masterpiece. It doesn't get enough credit. It's amazing. Love that movie, man.
Absolutely. And yeah, John Wick 2, you were John Wick 2, and a thing I really love about that movie is, you were talking about earlier how of the fear in the Tolkien movie or the Tolkien books about how Aragorn doesn't want to talk about the Nine, or how they show someone's scariness through other people's tellings of them. Great moment in John Wick is when in the first one, I haven't seen it in ages, but when he's telling his dad what happened, and his dad was like, "You pissed off John Wick."
Exactly.
Like, there's nothing I can do for you now. Like, it's over.
It's nothing. It's it, man.
We're like, a dad just abandoned his son
like,
over this. Like,
yeah. It's
what?
Like what? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
this is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, those are some really interesting picks, and I was shocked. I thought you would have had more fantasy on there or anything like that. But no, that's really. I'm really glad you have a diverse kind of spectrum of entertainment you enjoy, because a lot of people who are into the fantasy sphere are like, my favorite movies are like Harry Potter or like this or that. But no, it's the more diverse.
Actually, I'm not a huge Harry Potter fan. Even though I've seen all of them, I'm kind of like, I'm good off this.
The only movie I really, really love and find myself going back to is Prisoner of Azkaban, just because I think the performances of that are really cool, and it's really gothic and eerie. But yeah, I'm not a big Harry Potter guy either. I read the first two books, and I really liked the first one, and I hated the second one. But I could talk about, there's a review on my channel if anyone's curious, but I could talk about Chamber of Secrets for hours.
A lot of films that I like are from the 80s, man. My favorites, like in my top favorites, also, you know what I'm saying? Big Trouble in Little China.
Yes.
Willow. Like, these are movies that I love, like, ridiculously.
And,
like Willow, Big Trouble in Little China, Princess Bride, you know what I'm saying? These movies I grew up with, and they absolutely do it for me. The Goonies, I love them. The older way they used to go on adventures and have all this stuff, they don't really do that. The movies don't have the heart like that anymore.
Yeah, for sure.
It is what it is, but yeah,
Big
man,
Trouble in Little China is a really wild movie, but one of my favorite things about it is I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons guy, right? And the Beholder, one of the monsters from Dungeons and Dragons, is in Big Trouble in Little China. I don't know if you've ever played. Yeah, so in Dungeons and Dragons, there's this thing. It's a giant floating eye with stalks of eyes that come off it, and it can shoot lasers out of its eye. When they're going through the dungeon in Big Trouble in Little China, they open the door, and there's a Beholder from D&D, like not even inspired by or like a loose adaptation. It's right off the page illustration. I was so shocked when I saw that.
Oh wow, that's something I didn't know. You know what I'm saying? And then like to have that obviously one of the three storms definitely inspired Raiden. Like,
yes, absolutely.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's so cool, man. I love that. My favorite thing about the movie is that how American Jack's character is. It's like, Jack Burton is like the greatest character. Like, he is so awesome in the way that he reacts. He doesn't know what's going on, but he just is going with it. But he's like scared, but he's like, I'm gonna be American and tough. And like, if you really pay attention to how he reacts, it's hilarious. It's so funny. I love it.
The villain in that movie too is I don't know the actor's name, but he was just in that new movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is like a masterpiece. The dad in that he's like the villain, and that he is such a talented actor. That guy, I love him. But anyway, those are great picks. What an interesting, diverse cast of films you love there. So before we wrap it up here, where can people find you, and tell us about the content you're making, and where to find you?
Yeah, man. I make Lord of the Rings content. That is my bread and butter. That is my love. That is my passion. You can find me on TikTok. That is my main place that I am at. Knew Better, Do Better. KNEWBETTADOBETTA. No spaces. You can find me on all platforms under that name. If you type in New Better, literally, I'm gonna probably pop up first. So you can find me on Twitter.
And
YouTube,
I'll throw all those links in the description as well for you.
Yeah, everywhere, Twitch, all of that stuff. My YouTube, I used to have a lot of followers on YouTube, but then they got hacked. So my new YouTube, I only have a few hundred followers, or maybe not even that much, but I'm rebuilding it. So if you guys want to follow me on YouTube, that would help out profusely and immensely. So yeah, but TikTok is my main space, and so you can also see me there. I'm also going to be at Comic-Con with the OneRing.net. You know what I'm saying? I'm one of the people who was lucky enough to be invited by Amazon to go to London to see a sneak peek of the some footage for
more
the
evidence that you're paid off by them.
Yeah, which they're idiots, but it is what it is. At this point, they're going to believe what they want to believe. They're just trying to get shock value, and then when the show comes out, they're gonna look stupid because look how people are reacting to the Orcs picture.
Yeah. Exactly.
Now they're like, oh wow, I'm excited. No. You said I told you. I've seen things and I'm explaining that we like it. You know what I'm saying? Like their whole argument is backwards. Not to drag the end of this out, but just check this out. This always cracks me up. One of their big arguments is, especially the Nerdrotics, that clown. He's like, oh, they all use the same word to describe the show. That's what has me skeptical. Like, so if you live in if you live in Canada, right, and I live in New York, and I go to Canada, and I'm like, man, it's cold out here.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, it's cold. Like it's cold, so we both said it's cold.
There are common descriptors for products and things. Yeah.
You're not going to use some random weird word to describe it. We're all going to say what it is. And that's what we did. We all thought it was done excellently. We like what we saw. We like what we heard. We like what we discussed with the showrunners and our feedback from that. So we said, man, this is going to be really good. Don't worry. Because everybody was worried. So why wouldn't we say that? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it just sounds stupid, but neither here nor there.
And also you have the Voices of Arda podcast, which I'll
absolutely. Yeah, I almost forgot about that.
Yeah.
Voices of Arda podcast. That is going to be me and Callie Cosplay, who was another Tolkien content creator. Actually, she's a cosplayer and she does many different things. She wears many different hats. We also have a Discord. If you click on our bios, we have a Discord that is booming. It's wonderful. We do so many activities. We did a Tolkien trivia contest, all that stuff. So check me and Callie Cosplay out, because that's my partner in crime for the Voices of Arda podcast. We also have a YouTube channel for that. We're on Spotify and we're also on Google Podcasts. So
awesome. And that podcast too, I love the format of it. Every week it's like a new talk, like the swords of Arda or the music of Arda. It's awesome, guys. So anyway, check out all of your content. So thank you guys so much for watching today. This has been Luke and Friends. I was so happy to have you on. So thanks everyone for checking out the show. And as always, have a great day.